You know, it's been 72 hours since we started this conversation about our mental health. And I've been asking myself, quite frankly, is either me, you, or even the next person close to you? If you look around, almost everyone needs some kind of attention, and it is as important as it is. So on VSA today, we decided to stay on the issue of mental health, mental well-being, and actually see how we can make Africa and even the world a better place for us to live in. Welcome to VSA. We continue with the show on mental health. I've been doing a lot of digging in and digging deep, trying to understand all the conversation we've been having around mental health here on the square. Many African families and individuals have had to deal with challenges of mental health. In some situations, even little children show signs of depression. African parents hardly seek experts' advice, especially before now, and opinions on cases like this. Rather, some enforce more stringent terms and use force with the hope to see changes. It becomes so hard for parents to even understand what the child is going through. So experts have said parents need emotional intelligence to deal with mental health challenges, both in adults and children. Across the continent, there are tones of family troubles that may lead to depression and suicide, with examples seen in countries like South Africa, Kenya, and even Nigeria. Failed relationships, failed marriages, failed business adventures and expectations, they all have led many people into depression and even, in extreme situations, psychosis with very little help rendered to them. Now, suicide is the 15th leading cause of death in Africa, and it is believed that the continent is at a stage where the discourse has to be more focused on the state of mental health of Africans. Joining me to unpack all of these today are three mental health experts. But first, let's have two of them. Bukola Lamid, a mental health and family life practitioner here in Nigeria, and Dr. Chitai Murabula, the president of the Kenya Psychiatric Association and head of mental health, Kenyatta National Hospital. Later on, we'll be speaking with Dr. Adeyemi Obabire, a psychiatry senior registrar at the University of Ilorin and mental health advocate, will be joining us. So welcome to the program. So let's quickly jump into all of this, and let me start with you, Dr. Chitai. The family is a highly respected institution in Africa, and there are, tons of challenges families face on the continent. Let's start, by looking at how families have been coping, especially with any member who's going through some mental health challenges.
Okay, thank you very much, Sulaiman, for having me on the show. And you ask a great question, because everything seems to begin at the family level. So we all come from families, and a lot of people's personalities are shaped by circumstances within these families. So these circumstances can be good or bad. So if they're good, then you come out with the pleasant personalities, a pleasant personality, you are able to cope. You come out with what I can call some resilience coming out of your family. You have what I can call a psychological reservoir to face the world, because stresses within the world are a constant. So the world will have issues of unemployment, political turmoils, tragedies, loss of businesses, and pandemics like the COVID-19. So it all, a lot of things depend, a lot of a person's mental health depends on the family, but I must hasten to add that there are many other factors that affect a person's mental health. But focusing on the family, family determines your genetics, if we were to start there. So part of our characteristics are inherited from our parents. Also family, during a person's early childhood, they experience psychological growth, and this is influenced by the type of parenting that they get. So one famous psychologist said that the boy is the father to the man. So your characteristics when you are growing up simply will determine what you end up being, and these are mostly shaped by parents. So what if you are growing up in a family that already is undergoing challenges also of mental health? It could be trauma passed on also historically, and parents are exhibiting this through their children. So excessive punishment of the children, it could be that, but also simply abandoning their care. We may have parents who are not involved in the children's care, who are absent completely in their children's lives, and these are challenges. Also, we have issues of domestic violence, and these are problems across many families where children are exposed to violence. And once this happens, then children may not understand any other language except the language of violence. And this then is passed on. It affects their mental health. And maybe the last thing I'll mention, but not least, and the list is not exhaustive, is issues of substance use within the family. I'm mentioning these factors because these are some of the factors that have been easily mentioned by some of our even young people when studies are done across countries, including Nigeria.
Dr. Chitai, thank you very much. I'll come back to you so that we can actually stretch it, especially when you talked about, challenges, turmoil, problems people go through in their work life, in their environment, as well as maybe even in schools. Bukola, good to know that you're there and, you're working closely with families, which is very key here. Listening to Dr. Chitai, he's said it all. The family is more like the mirror. And if the family can't better understand what form of challenge a member is going through, it becomes very difficult for experts like both of you to come in. So what are those things should we be looking at? We have people who are colleagues. It might be me, it might be the next person, but sometimes we just might not know that we need help. What should we be looking out for?
Hello, everyone. Doctor, that was a very good presentation. I learned one or two things from what you have said so far. I totally agreed with everything that you have said. But you see, when we have to look at it from Nigerian perspective specifically, we have noticed that there's a stigma around what we call mental health. Okay, so because you need to embrace something before you can understand what it is. We have a lot of stigmatization, we have a lot of stereotype around mental health. So anytime we want to talk about mental health, first, what we normally do is to demystify mental health. Because a lot of people believe when you hear mental health, then you're talking about someone who has illness, so to speak. Mental health is for everyone has mental health. That's the first thing we usually tell people. Just like your physical health, your spiritual health, whatever health you have, mental health is the basic for every human being. In fact, there is no other health without mental health. Every other health comes from mental health. So these are the things that we need to first of all put out to families first, because families don't understand what mental health is. They don't understand that mental health is something that we all have. So when you say mental, they are thinking of psychosis and whatnot. Now, according to World Health Organization, that gave a peculiar definition of what mental health is. Because I said, can't do anything. We need to understand what we're dealing with. So what is mental health? According to World Health Organization, it said is a state of well-being And you cannot do anything if you don't have a good well-being, a healthy one for that matter. It is a state of well-being in which the individual, the person, an adult, a man, a woman, who realizes his or her own potentials and abilities. So you must first of all understand your potentials. It takes a good mental health for you to know that you have, potentials. Then you realize it. Then you can cope with normal stresses of life. I mean, these are the things that we need to let families know, that stresses are normal for everyday activity. Now, the capacity for you to cope is now you're having a good mental health. If you don't have the capacity to cope, then you don't have a good mental health. Then that is where we now have ill mental health that can cause mental illness. So these are the basic things that we need to let families know, that mental health, everyone has it. Mental health is not a disease. Okay, so once we understand that, then in psychology, we now bring it back to psychology. Mental health it includes our emotional being, how we think, how we feel, how we behave. So when you look at family, we believe that family is the first nation, and whoever you are as a family person is who you will become in whatever status you go out there. Either you are a doctor, you are a teacher, whatever, you're first human. And as a human being, you have mental health. And as you have the mental health, is the state of your emotional wellness, the way you think, behave, and act. So when you can cope with these things, can master your thinking, which creates a feeling for you. Once you're able to understand how your feeling is, then you'll be able to master your behavior. That is what a lot of family don't understand. And that's where we now bring in emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is simply understanding how you feel. There is nothing like good or bad feeling. It depends on the interpretation that you give to it. Okay, so there's nothing like when you are happy is a good emotion. Happiness could be an unhealthy emotion if you don't master happy emotions very well. Just the same way, sadness is not totally a bad emotion, because sometimes you can be sad and it's good for cautioning of the mind so that you would know what is making you to sad. So you see, all those things are components of mental health that we used to, we do a lot of preventive measures when we come, because we believe that prevention is better than trauma. We don't even say prevention is better than cure. Now we said prevention is better than trauma. It's better you are not traumatized. Okay, it's better you don't get to that state of mental illness, because at that stage you manage it. So
okay, let me bring in. Bukola, let me bring in Dr. Chitai. By the way, I think that there's some of it kind of intrusion getting into your audio there. I don't know, some kind of windy intrusion. I hope my producers can get that sorted out. That's with you, Bukola. Now, let me go to Nairobi again with Dr. Chitai, listening to Bukola. And by the way, we've started getting, feedback from people who have started following the show since we started for the week. And one of the messages we got, Dr. Chitai, was from a Nigerian. He said, well, he's excited we're looking at mental health here on News Central. And he said for the past 3 years, he's been dealing with suicidal, ideation. And he said, if not for his religious background and family that have been around him, perhaps he would have actually, snapped into it. Now, kindly take us through the steps of helping, someone who is going through such a difficult phase of depression or suicidal thoughts.
All right. Thank you very much. And I'm happy that that question has been asked, and I'm happy that the gentleman who asked the question is finding ways of coping that are helping him get meaning to life. And it's always good to step it up if you feel that these symptoms are persisting despite your best efforts to cope. Coming back to your questions about what usually happens for someone to develop suicidal thoughts and maybe suicidal attempts, I will say that every human being goes through phases in life when they have just some very fleeting thoughts when they question the meaning of life. Usually, it's almost for everybody, and you don't have to be ill to get these kinds of feelings. And that's why even biblically, the Bible is an old text, you find someone like Solomon coming to the conclusion, according to him as an individual, that actually life is meaningless. And a lot of philosophers tend to arrive at that conclusion. But however, for many people, life also has a meaning. Life also has a meaning. But what usually happens to an individual to strongly think about suicide and maybe attempt? Because you must also remember that even when you talk about people dying of suicide, and the numbers are many, staggering, I think 800,000 people worldwide die of suicide every year. And since this statistics was given in 2001, probably over 16 million human beings have died from suicide. But then it is also said that out of just one person dying of suicide, about 25 attempts. So many attempts, and the rate at which people attempt suicide is extremely high. Like in Kenya, for example, is 1 in 7 people. At least 1 in 7 people walking on our streets will attempt suicide at least once in their lifetime. These are high numbers, and these attempts also have consequences and a cost. So what happens? 3 steps can explain suicide from the beginning to the end. The first step is someone is going through pain. So it does not matter where the pain is coming from. It can be physical pain or emotional pain. I can be diagnosed with cancer, and that is painful, both physically and psychologically. I can be experiencing back pain that has been with me for a long time, and that is, that's painful. I can fail my exams. That is psychologically painful. I can lose my business due to COVID-19 pandemic, and that is also very painful. So someone starts questioning life the moment they are in pain, but not just in pain. They are in pain, but also they feel hopeless about the pain. So I'm in pain, and I'm thinking that this pain may probably not go away. So that's now when I start developing questions about, is it now rational to continue living? What is the rationality of life in this circumstance? And so what happens now from that is to go to the second stage. So you'll develop some suicidal thoughts, but those thoughts can become strong. So when do they become strong? They become strong if a person's connectedness to the society, it could be to other people or to hobbies or to their church, that connectivity, if it's weak, a person who's, for example, living alone in a foreign city, the thoughts may become strong because they don't have any connections to other people. So connections bring a very special meaning, and they protect, being connected protects someone from having their thoughts develop from just maybe weak thoughts to strong suicidal thoughts. And when one has strong suicidal thoughts, there's a third stage. So not everyone with strong suicidal thoughts will ever attempt suicide. So someone who attempts suicide may have some factors, including that they can access a means to suicide. So a good example is I have a firearm in my home. So if I have a firearm and another person does not have a firearm, I am at a greater risk, because I have a means to suicide right there in my home. I have knowledge, for example, about poisons, various poisons, probably that are there, but maybe I have also knowledge. It could be medicine. It could be medicines. And so because of that knowledge and access to those medicines, then I'm at a greater risk than someone who does not have that access. And the other factor may have something to do with how somebody experiences pain. So people experience pain differently. So if someone is quite resistant to physical pain, or they're insensitive to physical pain, and that can be a genetic factor, then they're at a higher risk. So if you are the kind of person who, while growing up, there was this idea of corporal punishment in schools, and the teacher will give you like 5 canes and you don't move, it means you are quite insensitive to pain, and that also presents a higher risk for suicide. So those 3 factors really coming together, and if they're there, then someone would be at a higher risk. Everything we say about, for example, this group or that group has a higher risk of suicide, soldiers, policemen, doctors, and so on, it's because of some of these factors. Doctors have access to medicine, soldiers have access to firearms and know how to use them, and so on and so forth.
I'll come back quickly to you, Bukola, but let me go with Dr. Chitai here on this because it is very important. Where do we place, actions, such as panic attacks, or sometimes some people want to be doubly sure. You are in your room and you thought that perhaps you haven't actually locked the door, and it has become a habit. You sit down and you thought that perhaps something has actually gone awry, and you keep going back and forth to check, or for some, they hear voices. How do we place these ones in all of what we're dealing with? Now we're talking about mental health.
Yes, sir, and these are mental phenomena. I mean, if you're talking about maybe someone experiencing symptoms of anxiety or symptoms of hearing voices, these are already symptoms of a mind that is now becoming unwell, So it's called psychopathology, a mind that is becoming unwell. And both all of them have several explanations. It boils down to our brain and how the brain functions. So if there's a hyperfunction in certain areas, you may experience these symptoms. One theory that explains anxiety is that anxiety and fear for that matter developed to help us survive in a dangerous savanna environment when we were still evolving, perhaps thousands of years ago. So we lived in a very dangerous environment. And so we developed this mechanism called fight or flight mechanism. So where we get this rush of immediately adrenaline pouring into the blood, and because the lion is right there, so you either want to run or you want to fight with this lion. So this mechanism is built within our brain to save us from the lions that are no longer a threat in the modern world, as it were. However, because these mechanisms can be triggered, these mechanisms can be triggered because of other circumstances. So what you can call a false alarm. So someone gets a false alarm in their brain that there's danger when actually there's no danger, and then they can go into a panic and they experience all those symptoms that someone usually experiences when they are frightened. So these are some of the origins of some of these symptoms, like anxiety, for example. And different people will have different levels of anxiety depending on their genetics again, and so on. And if you are experiencing maybe symptoms like hearing voices, that's a very serious symptom. I would say it's one of the symptoms of psychosis. And again, where does it come from? It definitely comes from somewhere in your brain. So it is because all the information we actually need for survival are kept in the brain. So if someone is experiencing psychosis, they tend to overestimate the danger in the environment again, and this can come up as voices either warning them and so on. And I can tell you this, it leads to distress. And this is where pain comes from, because you as an individual, you are experiencing these symptoms, everyone else is not. And so the immediate, you enter into immediate problems with the immediate family or friends.
I think that actually resonates with the question I'm throwing at Bukola. Bukola, in Nigeria, where you are, we've seen people who go through such, conditions as highlighted by Dr. Chitai. But the thing there is that sometimes people make jest of these people, and sometimes they think that they're just making them up just to avoid, maybe attention or to get attention. How do you deal with these, category of persons you have, in a family unit, especially when you have them right before you?
Okay, thank you. So in the family setting, we usually say in Nigeria, the preventive measures, put some preventive measures in place. And how we do it is we usually try to empower people on the help signs. Okay, so because someone who is depressed will not tell you that they are depressed. Okay, it is not easy for somebody to normally come out to you and say they are depressed. Like I said initially, a lot of people downplay mental health in this part of the world, and most times they try to attach it to spiritual stuff. Okay, so they believe, like what doctor said the other time, when somebody has panic attack and maybe you are too anxious, they begin to think that, okay, maybe there's one spiritual thing that is following you and all that. That's a narrative. So most times we say that people who have suicidal thoughts, people who do self-harm, people who do all those things usually have what we call the help signs. Okay, it might be by their body language, it might be the way they talk, it might be places they go to and all that. So I'm going to state some for people who are listening now. So someone who has been mentally and emotionally abused will constantly apologize. Okay, so when you see someone who constantly apologizes for nothing, then you need to look further. We are not saying that that is 100% correct, but when you seek that kind of a sign, it should trigger you to want to know what is happening to this person. Someone who needs a lot of assurance, a lot of reassurance, and oftentimes this happens to children a lot because they don't have a lot of self-esteem because of the mental health issues and the emotional trauma that they are facing. So they need somebody to validate them. They don't understand they are themselves. They need somebody to tell them that they are fine, things like that. They just need reassurance. They don't have this self-identity. That is a very, very, very valid sign. Then they seek validation and attention from people. Everybody, we are all social animals. We seek attention here and there because, we like to connect. Like what doctor said the other time, the connection helps in our emotional immunity. But when it's getting to an excess, this person just needs attention. This person is all over the place. They just want you to know that they are there. Then something is wrong. Okay, when people break down over very little arguments, and I'm talking from the family front now. Okay, things that you commonly see in the family setting. Any little thing triggers them. They break down over little arguments. They are too emotional. They are too expressive. They are too quiet, and it could be on different extremes. Okay. And some of them hide how they feel in order not to upset others. So you hear, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want the person to feel this way. That means the person is exhibiting some form of emotionally abused signs. Another one that I would try to say is they develop low self-confidence because you see that people take advantage of them easily. Okay, that is a very good sign of someone who has emotionally abused. And they put themselves last in their own priority list. What I mean by this is, I tell people that self-care is very important. There is no other thing. You have to put yourself first because you cannot give from an empty cup. You need to be filled before you can fill another person. Okay, so when you see people who are too selfless, I don't want to use the word selfless, but they go all the way at the expense of their own self, then you would know that this person needs attention. They need urgent attention. So most times they don't even put themselves on their priority list. They are always last. They always think that they are superheroes. They want to help people at the expense of their own self. Meanwhile, you have to be fine before you can hold up another person. So these are all help signs for you to know, or you see somebody who has always been very social and they are just withdrawn. You see someone who talks about death every time, who talks about life, they are just written in between, especially people who have suicidal thoughts. They have all those things moving in between their behavior, and we must be able to fish those things out.
Now, before we start talking about solutions, Doctor, I want you to speak to some aspect that I think we haven't actually dealt with, and it has to do with workplace bullying. Is that part of what we can categorize into the discussion today?
Yes, workplace bullying basically will form, part of what you can call trauma. It's a form of trauma, and why is it a form of trauma? It's because the individual is experiencing pain in a situation where most of the time they feel helpless. They cannot confront the situation. If for example you're working in an environment where you feel that the working hours are too long, as an employee you are in a fix between speaking out and most of the time you risk losing your job. or not speaking at all. But then what happens to that feeling that you have of perhaps aggression towards the individual? It could be a workmate, or it could be your boss who is harassing you at work. Usually, if human beings are very intelligent, human beings are the dominant, they're the most intelligent species in the world, and humans have actually conquered the world, and it's because of the sophistication of our brain. So now our brains have evolved mechanisms of dealing with situations where we are helpless. Now, for example, if your boss is harassing you, but then you feel powerless, what you do is that aggression turns towards yourself. So you turn that aggression those aggressive feelings towards yourself. So what happens is that you now see yourself as a bad person, deserving to be punished, So you punish yourself because you cannot be able to punish the boss. Probably you could punish someone else. It's also an evolved mechanism. It's called displacement. So you could punish someone else. You could come back home and punish your child for a very small mistake. Because the boss is harassing you, you may put it on your spouse, But if you put it on yourself, then it becomes depression, because you will feel bad, you'll feel hopeless, you'll feel guilty, and eventually you feel like life is not worth living anymore. So that's one of the mechanisms in which depression can arise from a workplace situation.
Listening to you, what comes to mind readily is that we all need a form of, knowledge about our mental health, because, inadvertently, some of us have actually caused people and even pushed them to the very end unknowingly. And now let's quickly talk about some of those solutions as an expert you can actually profile, so that people watching at the moment can start to identify, how they can give help to, to friends, to colleagues, to family members. And again, what are those, triggers, or what are those signs we should look out for, and what are those immediate help, just the way you can give first aid for any physical or biological emergency. Is there a first aid for a mental emergency?
Yes, so I really like what we started with. My co-panelists said that we should, to a large extent, focus also our effort towards prevention, because it's cheaper. We will totally eliminate a lot of the pain, but also it's a necessity, because we are talking about African countries where the preeminent problem is poverty, and so we must look for ways to prevent. But just to go back to your question and mention a lot of the symptoms we've been talking about throughout the program have actually been some of the things that one should look out for. I could go through and summarize a few, but also warn that mental disorders are like more than 200. Sometimes we think of mental illness as only that person in the marketplace who is collecting rubbish and singing songs and dancing and removing clothes. But mental disorders can be very subtle, like depression can be quite silent, and someone can suffer in silence. Mm-hmm. So some of the signs and some of the signs that one can look out for that is almost universal across many mental disorders is lack of sleep. So if someone simply is lacking sleep for many days, then they need some help, because sleep itself is important. And as a result, secondarily, someone can suffer major problems, including immunodeficiency, just because of lack of sleep. But it also can be a sign of many disorders, including depression and anxiety and other severe mental illnesses. Another problem is already we mentioned anxiety. So if you have excessive fear in routine circumstances, you get worried and you think so much about just leaving the house, and being where people are. If you are experiencing such symptoms, probably you could be having issues of anxiety. If someone gets angry too quickly, again, if there's a change, for example, in their behavior, that they were a very nice guy, she was a very nice mother, but suddenly she just loses it very fast and shouts, that could also be a sign that there's a problem. If someone also, they start expressing ideas that are out of keeping with the culture, generally, that can be a problem. We talked about strange experiences like hearing voices and having beliefs. So if someone is developing these beliefs all of a sudden, and without any proof, and claiming that someone in the family has bewitched them without any proof, or they are now communicating with angels, whether they are enjoying the experience or not. But it could be also that someone is having a sign of mental illness, and especially if some of these symptoms are being experienced in the context of someone declining in how they function. They now stop going to work. They now cannot cope with any stresses in life, and so on. Their relationships are becoming very erratic. That is a good sign. And then lastly, but not the least, if someone is beginning to use substances, or was using some alcohol, but now they're drinking every day and all the time, it can be also a sign that they are experiencing a mental illness. The alcohol use could be the mental illness, or it could be a cover for a mental illness. And all these things, there are a few of the signs that someone can look out for and do something, whether it is by yourself or whether it is myself, a family member, a friend. These are things that we should look out for and politely advise them that, okay, you could get some help somewhere. I don't know where, but there's probably some help for this problem. But for sure I see a change, and this needs help. That's how we should approach this, and we should be compassionate about it, knowing that it's not a pretense. Lastly, on the question of how we can ensure that at least we prevent. So what constitutes good mental health practices? What can I do to just maintain good mental health? We should never forget that the brain is part of the physical body. So a healthy body also results in a healthy mind. So
Absolutely.
Keep physically healthy. All the advices that doctors give about exercise and good nutrition that contribute to a healthy body will also contribute to a healthy mind. However, you can also add things like having sleep hygiene, regular sleep hours, a sufficient sleep of like 7 to 8 hours, not sleeping during the day, avoid coffee or tea in the evenings, and so on. During the time of pandemic, we've been telling people avoid excessive exposure to the news, because it causes you anxiety.
Dr. Joseph, you just said we should avoid coffee in the night. It looks like someone is talking to me. Let me bring in Bukola now. Tell us what you think, because we close in on this so that we can take Dr. Obavire quickly here. Bukola, what are those things that we should be doing? Don't tell me about coffee.
Okay, so we try to beat it a little bit down and very simple. We start with emotion. Remember, we mentioned that emotion is part of the mental health. How you think, how you feel constitutes your behavior. Now, we have some certain narratives in this part of the world that we have to unlearn. Narratives like saying that you don't talk, you don't need to share your whatever you're feeling with anybody. Now, we need to understand that emotion that we don't express becomes toxic. There's a way, because emotions are manufactured to be expressed. We need to understand that we're not supposed to conceal. Emotions are not manufactured to be concealed. So we every time try to always express those emotions, okay? If you don't express your emotion, if you are not assertive, you will become aggressive. So being assertive means that you are simply expressing yourself without adding pain. And the more you practice assertiveness, the better your mental wellness, okay? Don't keep emotions bottled up. You can sing them out. These are first aid. Sing them out. Singing is very therapeutic. You can write them. We see something is writing therapy. I hope you can see me?
Yes.
Am I still there?
Yes.
So you can write them out, you can talk them out, you can walk them out. So we have to disengage from those unhealthy narratives that says that you're not supposed to share your stuff with anybody.
All right.
People don't, so you must always express your feelings. It is okay not to be okay sometimes. But what is not okay is to stay on okay, if I can use that English. So when you stay in that state for a long time, then it becomes a problem. But each time you have those feelings, express it, don't bottle them up. Find someone, find people who you can express yourself
to. There's hardly, a day that we can say we have fully exhausted. Apologies, button in there. There's hardly a day that we can say we have exhausted looking at mental health. For both of you, I think there's hardly any time we come on this show we don't learn a thing or two. Personally, and even those watching, and we're excited having both of you here. I just quickly let you in on this. We should be having this conversation again. Dr. Chitai Murabula, we will be bringing yourself and Bukola Lamid again to, enlighten us, speak to Africa on our mental health and well-being. I'd like to thank both of you for spending time with us here on the program. You've been such a nice company. Dr. Chitai is the president of the Kenya Psychiatric Association and head of Mental Health Kenyatta National Hospital in Nairobi, Kenya. And of course, Bukola Lamid is a mental health and family life practitioner in Nigeria. We'll take a moment and we will return, but this time Dr. Adeyemi Obabire is Psychiatry Senior Registrar at the University of Ilorin in Nigeria and mental health advocate, will be joining me. Stay with us.
Africa is rising. Again, we hear our sounds echo on the other side. Afrobeat and Afropop reinvented, hip life brought back to life, new energy infused into Kwaito and Kwela. Africa is balling. Every stroke, every shot, every raise, we find our place at the top. Taking the helm of real power, new hopes for democracies. A breed of entrepreneurial tigers, audacious storytellers, and a promising generation raring to go. Truly, Africa is rising. And this is where the stories that define our continent live.
Well, our closing moment now with Dr. Adeyemi Obabire, who's a psychiatry senior registrar at the University of Ilorin in Kwara State, Nigeria, and a mental health advocate. Good to have you join me this evening, Dr. Obabire. Can you hear me, Doctor? Well, anyway, I think quite a number of things we've learned in the past 72 hours looking at issues, of mental health. Places like in East Africa, accessibility to mental health services are still very low, as there is still, some form of superstition and stigmatization found in the respective countries in the region, and even in Nigeria. To the extent that the names and manner with which you can see the footages on your screen. The question a lot of people have been asking is the homes where these people who we should be showing pretty much more of great love are put in the most harrowing, places. And of course, time with that number, we've seen people put in chains, and that's the condition that our, fellow Africans are meant to go through when they have one form of mental condition or the other. For instance, the Mathari Hospital in Kenya, Buta Beka in Uganda, and Muhimbili in Tanzania are known to address mental health challenges, but are quite far away from the people in urgent need of their services. There have, however, been improvements in recent times. Africans have been asking why mental health homes are far away from cities. That's another big question. Even in Western Nigeria, there are two famous mental health psychiatric centers, one in Lagos, which is Nigeria's economic capital, and another in Abeokuta in Ogun State, in southwest also of Nigeria, but both suffer from paucity of funds and facilities to ensure good services. For the teaching hospitals, they offer some form of services in that regard. The gaps are still, gaping, I meant to say, despite the rise of private organizations like Mentally Aware Nigeria and others. Quickly, let me have my closing moment with Dr. Adeyemi or Babire. Good to have you join us. Apologies, we lost the connection earlier on when I did introduce you. Good to have you join us on the program. The issue here, very quickly, is some of the key questions we're trying to, put our fingers on are the manner which Africans, even in Nigeria, look at people who are mentally ill. We have seen, footages of people being chained to trees, chained and, even starved, of food and water. Are those some of the ways to administer treatment to people who are mentally ill?
Thank you for having me. Clearly, those are not appropriate ways to treat people who are mentally ill. We could call those that kind of treatment degrading, and sometimes it could amount to torture, chaining someone to a tree, starving someone of food and water. Also, these things do not amount to treatment. It can be understandable in the context of the beliefs underlying such treatment towards those who are mentally ill. Sometimes they believe all mentally ill people are aggressive, and there's a need to keep them restrained, and so they need to get the strongest kind of restraint they can lay their hands on. And also sometimes starving them seems to work, simply because someone who has been starved for a long time is likely to be weak, and then the person will be unable to do anything, will be unable to talk, also will just simply lie down there weak. And that may explain why those practices have occurred in the past. However, it is clear that these things do not work. If anything, they even worsen the severity of the illness for those individuals and should be condemned outrightly.
Because we've seen experts like yourself, make friends with some of those people, in mental health facilities, and people wonder how you do that in comparison to what we have seen in other parts of the world, where people are some of them taken into the forest. Tell us what families, what we all can do to help ourselves should we have any form of mental challenge or the other.
The most important thing is to be educated, to have the right information about mental illness. A lot of the reason why people do not approach mental illness the proper way stems from the fact that mental illness is still shrouded in mystery in Nigeria. A lot of people see mental illness as something that has to have a supernatural connotation to it, whether in terms of the cost or whether in terms of the kind of treatment it requires. But the truth, from evidence, plenty of evidence shows that mental illness is can simply be described as a medical condition in which there are problems with the brain, the way the brain is functioning, and that manifests with the unusual behaviors, unusual speech patterns, and other symptoms of mental illness. If people understand that and approach mental illness the same way they approach common illnesses like malaria, hypertension, diabetes, recognizing that it is simply something that needs to be treated and handled. I believe that would help a lot. And at the same time also, if people also understand that when someone is mentally ill, there's a wide variety of mental illness ranging from seemingly minor ones as anxiety disorders and to the severe ones like schizophrenia. So if people understand that there's a wide variety, and once someone has a mental illness, it does not necessarily mean the person is like the vagrants we see on the streets, who is sometimes naked or half naked, looking very unkempt. Sometimes people who have mental illness can live, most of the time, people who have mental illness can live normal lives, can fulfill their potentials, hold down jobs, raise families, and have meaningful relationships with people. So if people understand that, I think it would help us to approach it properly. If I may add also, in addition, when we have this right understanding of mental illness, and then it would most likely encourage people to speak up when they experience symptoms. In my practice, a lot of the time, you meet people who obviously have a mental illness, but they feel reluctant to tell people about their experiences. And a lot of the time, it's out of the fear that they will be labeled as mad, in quotes. And because of that, a lot of them choose to suffer in silence. I think that would also help. And at the same time, if treatment is readily and easily available and also affordable, also that would also encourage people, because the reality is the burden of taking care of a mentally ill patient, particularly the more severe ones, is really, really, really high, and it requires a lot of financial investment, a lot of moral support also. So if the financial part can be removed, I think it would also encourage people the more to speak up and get treated. I think these attitudinal changes can help go a long way to improve the approach to mental illness.
Well, I do hope we can actually have this conversation, some other time, because the response or the feedback we're getting from Africa is overwhelming. A lot of people would want this conversation to continue, and we do hope that you oblige us when we reach out to you, because you've just been so lucid about the issues laid before you, and we have come to realize that that's not the best of way to care for people who are mentally ill, putting them in chains, starving them with food, water, and also taking them into the forest. I would like to thank you very much, Dr. Adeyemi Obabire, a psychiatry senior registrar at the University of Ilorin and mental health advocate. Many thanks for joining us on Village Square here on News Central.
Thank you very much.
So, mental health challenges from our conversations with the experts are real, and they are nothing to take like a pinch of salt. Look out for yourself, look out for your friends and family, and when it does matter, do see an expert. Many thanks for joining us on the show, and I would like to ask that you can watch us live on youtube.com/News Central TV and on Star Times at channel 274. You can also check the latest updates on Africa on newscentral.africa. I'm Sulaiman. I'll see you again tomorrow.